Hi, I'm Jean Schumacher, and I am founder of Simply Plant-Based, where I have a lot of programs to help you to change your health destiny. And coming soon, we're going to be launching with Dr. Deborah Shapiro, the Pregnancy Advantage, to help women get their bodies pregnant ready. And today, I have the opportunity to once again meet with Dr. Neal Barnard, who is the president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine and the founder of the Barnard Medical Center. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with me again today.
It's great to be back with you, Jean.
Well, you have written this amazing book called Your Body in Balance, and we've been breaking it apart and diving deep into this. And my favorite, absolute topics today, foods that are going to help fight moodiness. But before we dive into this, in the beginning of the chapter about foods and fighting moodiness, you gave a note of caution. Would you share with us those words of caution, please?
Well, yes, it's basically just that we have to really respect psychiatric issues. Depression is dangerous. Suicide is a real risk. And so what I mean is, I'm going to talk about food and lifestyle, and it's surprisingly powerful. But that doesn't mean that you cancel your doctor's appointment if you're on medications, throwing them in trash. That's not what I mean. I mean, work with your health professionals, take these things seriously, and use food and lifestyle in addition to whatever other treatments you may be getting. My hope, of course, is that we will find that other treatments are less necessary as we perhaps go to what might be actually some of the physical causes of the condition.
Well, Kim's story was so powerful. Would you share that with us?
Yes, Kim is an interpreter. She lives in LA, and she's there with her husband. But something happened to her at about age 15, just out of the blue. It was like somebody just let the air out of her tires. Her mood just collapsed. And the question was, what's that about? She was crying, she was depressed, she was miserable. She became nervous. Very, very often you see anxiety and depression coexisting, and that's what was her situation. She was totally indecisive. All of these things are classic symptoms of a major depressive disorder. So she's 15 years old. They bring her to the psychiatrist, and she was trying various things, eventually tried psychotherapy. She was put on antidepressants, as you might imagine, and she stayed on them for 19 years.
19 years. Wow.
Not uncommon. Now, she said, well, they didn't really make her depression go away. They changed the quality. They made it so that she could sort of function, but she didn't feel right. If anything, she might have felt just sort of numb. However, as time went on...
Numb?
I'm sorry?
Comfortably numb? Sorry, I had to throw that in there.
Okay. I think uncomfortably numb. She clearly was not herself as she had been before. But one day she went to a lecture. There was a psychopharmacologist who was talking about the gut and said, your gut makes neurotransmitters, just like the brain. And of course, now this is today fairly common knowledge that there's crosstalk between the gut and the brain. So she thought, okay, maybe the answer is change my diet. So she started off small changes, less cow's milk, maybe soy milk, getting away from meat, but not an entirely plant-based diet. It helped her. She felt better. But then she started taking more steps. And eventually she threw out the animal products altogether. And suddenly the clouds parted, she started feeling dramatically better, not just with regard to depression, but she had really quite bad PMS as well. And that just went away. She would laugh about it in a way, saying her husband wanted to be on another planet, when during that time. But she said that just went away. Physical things like allergies went away as well. And so here's the point I'm making, is that depression, we think of it as a mental condition, and it is, of course, but it has a huge physical component. And foods appear to play a role. The gut may play a role. And in addition, when depression gets better, physical things can get better as well. So there's an interaction between the mental symptoms and physical well-being as well.
Well, let's start with the basics. I mean, what is depression, and how do psychiatrists diagnose a major depressive disorder?
Yeah, depression is not just, I'm in a bad mood today, I'm stressed out. That's not what it means. It means that you have a depressed mood and it's persistent. It's not just this afternoon. But along with it go physical issues. You often can't sleep, or you're sleeping too much. You can't eat, you got no appetite, or in more atypical cases, you're eating too much. Both of these can happen. And along with it come fatigue and restlessness, and you can't concentrate very well. And I don't have to tell you that suicidality can be part of it, or preoccupation with death, and what it should really be interpreted as pain. I want to be free of pain. What will get me out of this pain? And those are chronic preoccupations. And so that's what it is. And the term for these kinds of conditions that's commonly used now is major depressive disorder.
Well, what can trigger depression?
It can be entirely physical things. For people who thought, well, it's just, bad childhood or under stress, not so. And we learned this the hard way. There is a drug called reserpine, which is antihypertensive. It lowers blood pressure. But after it was marketed, it became clear that many people taking this became depressed. And you think, wait a minute, nothing had changed in their lives. They were still the same person, but their mood had tanked. And so the obvious connection is the neurohormones that reduce blood pressure also are ones that are active in maintaining mood. So you knock down blood pressure and you're knocking down mood at the same time. But lots of other things can happen too. Many physical, if I can call them physical insults, can affect your mood. Maybe the classic one is alcohol. Alcohol is a sedative, but for people who are drinking continuously over a longer period of time, they will very often report that their mood is just not what it was. And if they just decide, I'm going to set that aside, for now, their mood will often come right back up. And then you will see other physical insults. When a person has had a heart attack, they've had a stroke, sometimes they just fall into this depression. And it's beyond just what you would expect from having had a physical illness. And you'll also see it in childbirth. The family's all gathered around. Are we all happy? We're all celebrating. But you feel inexplicably bad, and you're crying and all this stuff. This isn't you. This is your body chemistry going kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And that'll happen.
Well, what about food? Can food trigger depression?
It can, and I have to say, we found out about this kind of by accident. We were doing a study with Geico, the car insurance company. The reason we're doing this is that they're just right over there, about 4 blocks away. And we were doing a study with Geico to help people who wanted to lose weight or people who had diabetes. And we used a vegan diet, a plant-based diet at work, and people got better. I mean, they lost weight. If they had diabetes, they improved. It was a great thing. But there was an unexpected side effect. We checked lots of symptoms in the course of this, and one thing stood out is that depression got better in people. We used paper and pencil tests of what your mood is like, what your sleep is like, your appetite, all these things, and depressive symptoms improved. And the flip side, same story, anxiety symptoms improved. And beyond that, job absenteeism improved. So something about their adjustment was improving a lot as well. That would have been remarkable, but maybe just a fluke. But other researchers have been looking at the same thing. There's a great researcher named Bonnie Bezold who did a survey. And it was not big. She compared 60 vegetarians to some omnivores, 78 omnivores, 60 vegetarians. And she compared them with a variety of standard mood scales. And what she found is that the vegetarians did better on all these scales. Fair enough, that's good, but not a very big sample. So she repeated it with a brand new sample, much larger, and she found the same kind of thing, that the people following the plant-based diets did consistently better. And so at this point, we didn't know really why, but something about being on a plant-based diet made them feel better. Now, you might think it would be the opposite, because if you follow a vegan diet, you have a lot of people asking you nudgy, depressing questions, like, where do you get your protein? And
I know.
I'm blood type O, so I can't go vegan. And where do you get your calcium? And don't you feel weak? Also, you'd think that vegans would be depressed having to hear all those questions and getting harassed by everybody, but no, they don't. They handle stress better, and their mood symptoms overall as a group are better.
Wow. Okay. Obviously, there's going to be foods to avoid, but what about foods to include? Is that going to matter as much?
I think so. We need more research in this area, but there have been a few large studies. There was a big Spanish study that looked at people who generally avoided meat, they tended to do better, but they also found that people who emphasized vegetables and fruits tended to do better. And again, at this point, this isn't explaining why, but this is an observation. And generally speaking, you do see that when people favor plant foods, different studies pick on different things. Some of them have said, well, it may be the fruits, it might be beans, it might be nuts, but it typically is some kind of a plant-based regimen. People have studied Mediterranean diets, and they find the same kind of thing, that the more people are into, and when I say Mediterranean, I mean really emphasizing vegetables and fruits and de-emphasizing meat. Generally speaking, that seems to be helpful. Researchers have looked in Asia, found similar findings that meaty diet, which is coming in, seems to be more associated with depressed mood. A more plant-based diet, which is the healthy tradition, seems to be associated with better mood. So all of these things have suggested that plant-based diet is good. Specifically, vegetables and fruits seem to be particularly helpful.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the foods to avoid. I mean, dairy. Okay. We seem to keep coming back to dairy. Is dairy depressing?
I don't know, but I am concerned for one particular reason. We have known for a long time that, this will sound like a funny segue, but let me make this anyway. When people are narcotic abusers, often their mood is dramatically affected over time. Researchers in Scandinavia started looking at women who had postpartum psychosis, and which is not common. I'm not talking about just the postpartum depression or the blues that some people will feel after childbirth, but postpartum psychosis is where you're delusional, possibly hallucinating, and it starts a day or two after giving birth. And what the researchers did is they did spinal taps on women who had postpartum psychosis. You remove cerebrospinal fluid. And they found casomorphins in their CSF. These are the compounds that we talked about in previous episodes that come from eating dairy products. Dairy products have casein protein that breaks apart in your digestive tract, and it releases these little short protein fragments, peptide fragments, called casomorphins. They are narcotics. They're not terribly strong. The strongest one is about has about 1/10 the brain binding power compared with morphine. Strong enough. They go to the brain, they attach to the very same receptors that morphine or heroin would attach to, and they work like narcotics. Here's the point. The women who had postpartum psychosis had a lot of casomorphins in their blood, but also particularly in their cerebrospinal fluid. And so the researchers said, what is this about? For at least some women, this psychosis appears to be due to this poisoning by these enormous amounts of this narcotic. Where was it coming from? And in this case, it was not coming from cheese or yogurt or a cheese sandwich or anything. It was coming from their own breast milk. So yes, they had given birth, and then within a day or two, the breasts started producing milk. And some of that milk would get into the bloodstream and break apart and release the casomorphins that went into their brain. And so, that gave us an explanation for some cases of postpartum psychosis, but more importantly, it made us worry about women and men everywhere are getting casomorphins into their bloodstream, which does pass the blood-brain barrier, hitting their brain, and low dosing themselves with these dairy-associated narcotics day after day after day after day. So the question is, could that affect the brain? It definitely does. It seems to lead to the addiction to cheese products, but whether it's a contributor to depression per se, I think we need to stay tuned. Well, but isn't that an amazing finding?
Yes, but how does it get past the blood-brain barrier? I mean, isn't that like to stop things from?
Yes, it is to stop things, but it's not. But it's very leaky for certain compounds. And I was at a symposium some years ago where this question came up, and there was a reporter who said very definitively, "Oh no, the blood-brain barrier stops that." It does not. Toxicologists have looked at this, and the casomorphins go straight through, and that, frankly, that makes some sense, because what is their biological function? Are they just there for fun? What we believe is that milk from the cow goes into the calf's body and provides nutrients for growth. And the casomorphins are there to calm the calf. And it's particularly apparently something to try to regulate the brain function of the growing baby, or the biological substrate of the mother-infant bond, something like that. And now, of course, in adult humans, it's the human Velveeta bond, I guess it is. But in any case, no, the blood-brain barrier is not a barrier to the passage of casomorphins.
Wow.
Yeah. So stay tuned. I mean, it raises the question, if you're just low dosing yourself with dairy-associated narcotics, could it affect the brain? And my guess is, so going back to Geico, these people were eating no cheese. Their mood started coming back up to where it should be. Is that the reason? Is it their gut? Is it an anti-inflammatory effective diet? I think it could be all of those things. So, well, in fact, let me just give you a little more detail on this, if you don't mind. Forgive me for this long-winded answer. The gut bacteria do change, and they change rapidly when you have switched from a meaty diet to a high-fiber diet. That feeds back to the brain. And the diet is also anti-inflammatory, and that seems to help the brain too. So those are all the reasons that we are assuming the diet has this effect.
Wow.
And by the way, I should mention about our Geico study. People will say sometimes, well, you can do a plant-based diet where you live in Washington, D.C., or maybe in New York you could do it, but who's going to do this in Georgia or Texas or whatever? The Geico study, we did two. The second one was in Dallas, Texas. It was in 10 cities: Dallas, Texas, Macon, Georgia, Buffalo, New York, San Diego, all around. And what we learned is that people get better in all of those locations, and they can do the diet in all those locations. So where you are is not a barrier.
All right. Well, some places, I mean, like, barbecuing in the South is like a sport, in itself.
Well, it is, but that's true in New York, or anywhere. And so I really think that everybody has pretty terrible diets, but people are willing to change, and I don't care where you are. If you have diabetes and you got extra weight and you want to get better, it doesn't matter where you are, you can change. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, a team of researchers decided to put a plant-based diet to the test, randomly assigning volunteers to 3 diets. One that included meat, poultry, fish, one that just ate fish, and then obviously no meat, no fish of any kind. What did they find?
It was a small study. It was really a pilot study, but the only diet that was helping at all was the one that got away from the animal products. The others were frankly useless. And I might mention that when people have looked at ketogenic diets, they seem not to help the mood either. If anything, they might be harmful.
Wow. Well, I know you talked about the studies you did with Geico, but didn't Dr. Dean Ornish, didn't he have some similar findings?
He did, and I have to say, I really think Dean Ornish is just a genius. He not only showed you could reverse heart disease, he did really groundbreaking work with prostate cancer, but he's also done, I think, a really important thing, which is to see how you can apply this healthy diet and lifestyle, because more than just diet, all around in medical centers everywhere. And so he has tracked people who have followed his program. And it's remarkable. In doing psychological tests, you see that as their physical wellness is improving, their mental wellness is improving too. And it happens rapidly. You look at people and 12 weeks later, they are noticeably better. But by that I mean you're rating their mood very carefully and very objectively, and you can compare them to a control group. They're better, and then they just stay that way, and it's a persistent thing. Now, I think part of it is, frankly, if you're physically healthier, you do have more hope. But there's also this physical component that I think is really important.
I know we touched a little bit about this, but low-carb diets seem to be like, they keep coming back. They keep circling around under a new name. And people do lose weight. No ifs, ands, or buts. But do you see the same level of changes in the brain chemistry?
I think, frankly, it's, yes, there are a lot of ways of losing weight. And physically, you can lose weight on a vegan diet, you can lose weight on a ketogenic diet, but that's about where the similarities stop. When you look at people following ketogenic diets, in many cases, their cholesterol levels rise, their mortality over the long run is higher. And with regard to mood, we don't have a lot of studies, but there was a direct comparison study comparing a low-fat diet and a low-carb diet. And the low-carb group did not do well. Depressive symptoms come up, hostility comes up, which you might have encountered if you talk to a low-carb advocate. Anxiety came up in this group. Now, I don't mean to well, I want to acknowledge that I think we need more research here, but it raises the hypothesis that when you're putting a lot of meat and greasy foods in your digestive tract and your gut bacteria are going to respond to that by favoring the unhealthy bacteria, it's very likely to feed back to the brain in a harmful way.
Ooh.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing.
Well, I cannot say I recommend that low carb diet. No. Right. And so nice. That's one of the things that people in my programs are like, you mean I can eat carbs? Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, you can. Well, in 2016, the BBC, they did a story and they reported how depression was pretty rare in Japan until the 1990s. What's going on there?
It's a fascinating thing. I have to say, I've been studying the story in Japan in many different respects. As you know, Japan was following a rice-based diet, rice and noodles, up until maybe around 1980, 1990, when Westernization started to take over. Prior to that point, the dietary staples were plant-based. There was some use of meat and fish and so forth, but it was smaller amounts used mostly to flavor the rice and the vegetables. And it was not an ice cream eating country. This was not Cheesecakeville. Dairy products were largely unknown. However, all that has changed with Westernization. And the idea was to have meat, steak lunches became common, and milk started to be promoted so you could be big and strong like the Americans. And several things started to happen. Breast cancer went way up, diabetes went up, cardiovascular disease. But also, depression started to be reported. And I have to say, Gene, I have searched for scientific articles and lay articles or reporting on depression in Japan prior to Westernization. And what you find is economic depression. You don't find anything about psychological depression. Now, I kept thinking it's got to be there, but it just isn't reported because the Japanese people are kind of reticent and they don't want to discuss it and whatever. But what you find is the beginnings of reports, and people had no idea what to make of this, starting right after Westernization. So I suspect that it's true that as the meat and the dairy came in, fiber goes out, healthy carbohydrates go out, and the depression follows. So I think it's real.
Wow. That's powerful when you see it in a whole population like that.
Yes, and lots of other things that came in, as we've discussed, hot flashes and weight gain and just myriad things, suggesting that when you change the fuel that goes into the tank, lots of stuff can happen.
Right. So how can shifting to a plant-based diet be a mood booster?
Part of it, I have to say, this is the boundary of science. We're still understanding this, but the lion's part of credit that doesn't, part of it is the microbiome. The other part is an inflammatory issue. Your white blood cells are patrolling your body, and they're looking for viruses, and they're looking for bacteria. And when they find them, they create antibodies, which are little protein torpedoes to knock them out. And so your body has an inflammatory response to invaders to protect you. And what that means is that the tissues of your body, when they're injured by an infection or by trauma, they make inflammatory chemicals that will signal the white blood cells, come and defend me. And those chemicals get into your bloodstream and they will go to your brain. And so what I'm saying is that if you are very much inflamed from an accident or infection or something like that, it will not just affect you from the shoulders down, it affects your brain as well. And researchers have found that there is in fact an inflammatory component to depression. So so you asked, how does a plant-based diet help? A plant-based diet is an anti-inflammatory diet. And when you look at CRP, C-reactive protein, which is a blood test, that it's a good general indicator of inflammation.
Mhm.
It goes down. It goes down significantly when people do a plant-based diet. So physically, that's great. That means my body's less inflamed. Your brain is attached to your body, and you have the same anti-inflammatory effect there. So that's what we think is happening. This has been applied to all kinds of autoimmune conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's disease, which is a condition where you have dry eyes, dry mouth. Venus Williams had that. Went on a completely plant-based diet and got her game back. So this is the anti-inflammatory effect of the diet. And so we're thinking that when Kim, who we talked about at the beginning, went vegan, she's got an inflammatory condition, depression, that is now being treated by an anti-inflammatory diet. So that's what we think is going on.
Well, I remember, and it's interesting how standard doctors interpret this, the CRP, because I remember when I first started doing this, and I said to my doctor, I wanted to, get a base bloodline, to start, and I wanted to measure the C-reactive protein. And then I said, I'd like to do this again in 6 months. And she's like, why? I said, because I want to see changes. She's like, no, it's not going to change. It is what it is. And that's, and I'm like, okay, just humor me, And so now she started to see the changes, obviously, because my CRP is like negligible. So
well, I think she had that response because she had never heard of it getting better.
Right.
I mean, she never
until me.
Until you. She never met anyone like you, and she also had she hasn't been using this dietary intervention.
She had not. So this was all new to her because I kept bringing stuff into her, going, "Here, read this."
Exactly.
I want to report in 2 weeks. So
yeah, but this is very exciting for patients and for doctors too, to see that we've got control that we didn't used to have. So I think we're going to see more and more enthusiasm, which is good.
I know. Well, can this inflammation cause damage to the brain?
Yeah, I think it can.
Long term, or can it be reversed?
Long term, yes, possibly reversible. What I was suggesting is that chronic inflammation will affect the brain and lead to depression. But when you look at people who are depressed, suggesting that there's an inflammatory process going on, they're at higher risk for dementia. And dementia meaning you're damaging and destroying connections between the brain cells. So yes, I think so. And by the way, this also argues for not just using pharmacology to try to boost neurotransmitters. This argues for making sure you change the diet too. So yeah, fine, take your Prozac, but let's change the diet because you want to knock out that inflammation.
Well, what about the type of fat in the diet? Can this make a difference?
Maybe. I think we need to stay tuned on that, but there's one type of fat called arachidonic acid, which is plentiful in animal products, and it is believed to promote inflammation, both in the body and in the brain, and possibly even interfere with the normal brain function. Stay tuned. I think we need to know more about that.
Okay. I will be staying tuned.
Yes.
What about soy products? Could consuming soy bring on significant antidepressing effects?
Again, I think it's a tantalizing possibility, and this was raised by the Japanese studies. When we started to see more depression coming in, thought, okay, here are people who used to eat rice and soy. They're not eating it anymore. They're now eating pork chops and steak, and the soy is gone. And so could that be the loss of soy? Could that be a reason? Maybe. There have been some studies suggesting that if you're in America and you didn't have a tradition of soy, that adding soy does have an antidepressant effect. I do think we need more research on that. The way the studies are done is you just introduce tofu, soy milk. Some people use soy powders, and you just have them a couple of times a day and see what happens.
Well, I'm a fan of soy yogurt. I've been making that in my Instant Pot, and that has been an awesome thing. It just expands, so many things in terms of sauces and whatnot. So it's just been a great thing to add to my diet.
It's a very cool thing. Yeah.
And so easy to make, ridiculously. I mean,
Yes.
like seriously ridiculously easy to make.
Yes.
So instant, make it in the Instant Pot, adding the probiotic to the soy milk, let it go overnight, and in the morning you have soy yogurt.
Yep.
It doesn't get much easier than that. So, okay, fiber. Does this have an impact against depression?
There is an association, American survey done by the US government, and it's called the NHANES study, the National Health and Nutrition Education Study, if I'm remembering correctly. And they go around and they survey people. They ask, what do you eat and how's your health? And they found this peculiar association with diet, particularly fiber, that those individuals having more fiber had substantially less risk of depression. So here are the numbers. Your average American is now, in their study, was getting about 16 grams of fiber per day. That's not much. And there are people who get less than that because animal products have none. And if you would bump it up to 21 grams a day, they found that depression was 41% less likely.
What?
Which, that's big. But
this is increasing 5 grams of fiber.
Right. But they also looked at people who are eating much more. And at the highest fiber intakes, depression was as much as 70% less likely to occur. So those I mean, it's a huge difference.
Wow.
And so again, what we're thinking is, what is fiber? Fiber is roughage in vegetables and in fruits and in beans and whole grains. So you're getting antioxidants, which help you fight inflammation. You're also getting healthy gut bacteria, and you're getting away, you're getting away from the casomorphins and all that stuff. So fiber could be part of this. The other piece of it is that fiber helps you stabilize your blood sugar. Your blood sugar will respond to what you eat, but fiber will keep it from going kind of roller coastery. So that's helpful. And lastly, fiber is a potential fuel. It's theoretically indigestible, but as it goes through the gut microbiome, they will ferment it in some cases, and they can produce what are called short chain fatty acids. These are tiny little molecules that will sneak through into your bloodstream and seem to have brain effects that are favorable. So, as I know I've been saying throughout this interview, stay tuned. We need more research on all these areas, but we see this pattern coalescing, favoring the high fiber foods and really moving us away from the animal products that don't have fiber.
Well, researchers have credited folate, which is a B vitamin found like spinach, broccoli, asparagus, beans, lentils, with having an antidepressant effect. What's going on here?
Well, it could be the following. These are all leafy greens, broccoli and so forth. They have foliage. There is a B vitamin named for foliage. It's called folate. And folate is good for many things. It helps you reduce cancer risk, but it also plays a role in the synthesis of serotonin, which is a brain chemical involved in mood regulation. So that could be part of it. But the other thing is, if you bring in, frankly, all of the plants, not just the foliage plants like green leafy vegetables, but the lentils and beans and so forth, all of them have almost no saturated fat, really. And they don't have much of any kind of fat, but proportionately their fat is higher in omega-3. And that might be helping brain function as well.
Okay.
I mean, it's a funny thing to say. If you'd sent some broccoli to the laboratory, you would think there's no fat in it. But they would tell you, no, it's about maybe 7, 8, 9% fat. And of that fat, proportionally, it's relatively high in omega-3. So eat lots of green leafy vegetables.
All right.
Yep.
Well, so far we've just focused on food choices. I mean, what about physical activity? Is that going to have an impact?
Well, it does. I think many people have just discovered this sort of on their own. If you're down in the dumps, you get outside, particularly on a sunny day, you get your heart pumping, and that helps. But researchers have put this to the test in really, I think, very elegant studies. There was a research team at Duke University, and they brought in a group of people. They were all over 50, and they were impressed. And they asked some of them to take a typical antidepressant, Zoloft. Then they asked some others to exercise. And they asked a third group to take the Zoloft and exercise. And what they discovered is that they all seemed to benefit. The exercise was about as good as the medication. despite the fact that
Wow.
it didn't cost anything. There's a however here. This group was questioned because they thought, wait a minute, when you take Zoloft, you're all by yourself, you just swallow the pill, but when you do the exercise, it was a group, it was a class. So you're with other people, and the reason you're feeling better is that you got all this social support. So researchers in Dallas did a study where they took out the social support. They said exercise, but you exercise all by yourself. So you get on the treadmill, or you get on your elliptical or whatever, 3 times a week. And they showed that even if you're doing it by yourself, you still get an antidepressant effect. And I have to say, for me, when I'm at my best, I'm running maybe, about 3 miles or so 3 times a week, something like that. And I'm not a particularly brilliant runner, but I have to say, I do find that it does have a really good mood stabilizing effect for the rest of that day. And that's, I think, what we're seeing. So I am inclined to think that what we ought to be doing with depressed people is use medications if you absolutely must, but why not do a combination of a healthy plant-based diet and regular exercise? And I suspect that the effects would go beyond an antidepressant effect, because researchers have looked at the cognitive benefits of this. Researchers at the University of Illinois brought in a group of people, and they had them take a good brisk walk, and they found that it actually reduced or reversed brain shrinkage, particularly in the hippocampus, the site of memory. It improved cognitive function. So physical activity has physical effects within the brain, both for mood regulation and for preserving cognition.
Well, I'm glad to see it's not just running, because I don't know, what is it about plant-based people when they go plant-based and they start running? No, I'm sorry. Unless a bear is chasing me, I am not getting out running.
You don't have to run. If it makes you feel better, the University of Illinois study that I was just mentioning, which is that was a 40-minute brisk walk. And the way they started it, actually, these were older folks who are not going to be running marathons. But what they did was they had them do a 10-minute walk. And a brisk walk means it's not a trudge. You're not shuffling. You're going fast enough that you feel your pulse is going up a little bit, but not so fast that you can't speak. And so 10 minutes 3 times a week, and then the next week 15 minutes, and then the next week 20. So they increased 5 minutes a day. But once they got to 40 minutes, that was it. So you could do a 40-minute brisk walk, but for people who can't, let's say your joints are really bad, or you're massively overweight or whatever, if you cannot do meaningful exercise, you will still benefit from the diet change. So exercise is not essential, but it's a good thing to add. Plus, the other thing is you can't eat a bowl of ice cream when you're running. So
Fair point.
It's good in all those ways.
Well, I did see that, like in my mother-in-law. She retired at 55 and literally sat in front of television and became a QVC shopaholic. And it wasn't long, I mean, from 55 till 72, that she had to go into the nursing home for Alzheimer's. And, and I attribute it to 2 things. One is the diet, but also she did not do anything. So
the two go together. If you're parked in front of the TV set, you are physically immobile, but you get up to go to the refrigerator. And when people have more physical activity, they do better. And when they've got a healthier diet, they want to do more exercise.
Well, I won't be running anytime soon. So,
okay, that's all right. Hopefully a bear won't chase you.
I'll be thank goodness. But I'll be out in the kayak and biking and, all that good stuff. So
that's good.
What about sleep? Is that going to affect your mood?
Well, it sure does. Particularly, I have to say, I noticed this personally. When I was an intern, we would go to the hospital on Monday morning, work all day Monday night, all day Tuesday, and then go home Tuesday night. And that's when you slept. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's what we did. And so we were on call every 3rd night, and we were up all night, and you worked every other day, 7 days a week. And you got a good medical education, but here's what we noticed. 2 things. First is memory went down. You had to write down everything. Everyone had clipboards, and if you didn't write it down, you didn't remember it. And that's, I believe, because the beginning of the night is when your brain is involved in what's called slow wave sleep. And if you lose that, you don't integrate facts and words and things that you're trying to remember. But the second half of the night is when your brain is involved in REM sleep. And that's when you're integrating emotions. And if you're just not sleeping, you're up all night, I guess everybody knows this, you feel crabby. Your memory is shot, you feel crabby, and you'll do anything just to get through the day. So it's lots of black coffee and junk food and whatever. And so everything goes to pot. So it's important to get a good night's sleep.
Well, I do. I know. If I don't get a good night's sleep, God help anybody around me. I mean,
Right.
I am
You are not
cranky,
alone.
irritable. Leave me alone. Just, right. Until I can catch, a good night's sleep, and then I feel, normal again.
Right.
But no, if I don't get a good night's sleep, you do not want to be around me. So yeah. I get it. Well, okay.
It's, when we were, 2 and 3 years old, if we would get all grouchy if we were tired, and that doesn't change. We just are a little more subtle about it.
Right? It's true. And it's amazing how those kids can just literally pass out anywhere.
Right.
I mean, you can pick them up, throw them around. I mean, they're still asleep and they can get this depth sleep almost. Right. It's exactly. Great. But so here's the $1 million question. How do we get that good night's sleep?
Well, let me give some kind of basics, because frankly, I think that for 95% of people, they're not doing the basics, and I call it sleep hygiene. Number one, caffeine. Caffeine's okay. Coffee, I don't think it's a big health issue, and I say this as a person. I don't drink coffee or tea or anything. I just never got a taste for them. So, but I think they're okay, except different people metabolize caffeine at different rates. And there are plenty of people where they have 1 cup of coffee in the morning, and at 10 o'clock at night, some of that caffeine is still in their bloodstream. And they might doze off to sleep, but their sleep will be lighter, and they're more easily awakened. Second thing is alcohol. You have a glass of wine at dinner time, and it lulls you into feeling sleepy. But in the middle of the night, it's metabolized by your liver into aldehydes, which are stimulatory chemicals that will wake you up. And they will, so the first half of the night, your sleep is great. And then as your liver turns the alcohol into aldehydes, your sleep becomes rocky. And it's 4 a.m. and you'll feel crummy and so forth. Secondly, we talked about exercise already. If you have not been physically active, your muscles aren't tired, and so your body doesn't demand sleep the way it does if you have really had a good workout of any kind. And it does, even just things like push-ups will strain the muscles and make you sleep better. So you've been careful about caffeine and alcohol, and you've done some push-ups or squats or something, so your muscles are a little strained, and that will help you sleep. I have one other exercise that will sound peculiar, but it came from an observation. If you look at your cat's about to go to sleep, and your cat kind of walks around in a circle, getting her little bed together, and then they open their mouth, and they do a big yawn. And your dog will do that. And when I was in medical school, I had a rescued lab rat who would stretch out her little rat paw and open her mouth and do a big rat yawn and doze off into sleep, probably dreaming about the rings of Saturn, or I don't know what rats dream about. But anyway, I was struck by the fact that all animals go through this preliminary ritual before sleep. And children do this. They're 7 years old, and they stretch and they yawn. They do this like a half hour before sleep. You look at adults, and they're watching TV, they click it off, and they lie down. Or they close their book and they lie down, and they don't go through this regimen anymore. So I started experimenting with it. And this sounds completely crazy, but try it. About a half hour before you want to go to sleep, stretch out your arms and do a big stretch. It'll be fake, but just do it anyway. Open your mouth, hopefully no one is watching, and do a big yawn. It's not real, but do it anyway. And then do it again, and eventually it will become a real stretch and a real yawn, and you'll notice that your brain is starting to get ready for sleep. Do that 4 times, really vigorously, and just see if your sleep isn't better. Sounds crazy, but it works. Lastly, let me say a comment about what maybe not to do. Ambien and related sleeping medications are extremely popular, and they work to a degree. But I cannot tell you how many people wake up in the morning having taken Ambien the night before, and something funny happened to them during the night. I once knew a person who woke up in the morning and found his kitchen all filled with snack foods and Coca-Cola and all these things all over the table. Well, he was asleep under the influence of Ambien. Something happened and he woke up. He got his keys. He went out into his car, and in an Ambien-induced fog, he went to the convenience store and bought all this food and brought it back home. And one of the things about Ambien and related drugs is they wipe out your memory. So you will not remember what happened. And it's a freaky thing. So I would encourage people to really avoid these drugs and use good sleep hygiene. Now, I can't say that there is never an indication for them, but in my view, they are massively overused.
Well, there was a show called Grace and Frankie with, it's on Netflix.
Okay.
And Lily Tomlin and, anyway, one of the characters in the show had taken Ambien, and he gets up in the middle of the night and he goes on and does food. He goes in, eats massive quantities of food in the middle of the night. Okay. And in the middle of the night, she gets up and then she breaks up with him and goes back to bed. And then he goes back to bed. And then the next morning, he didn't remember any of it. So he had no clue that they had just broken up. So.
Well, actually, I did not realize that show had happened, but it displays two things. One is the lack of memory, which you talked about. But the other is people do get in the mood to party. And they will eat things and they'll want to drink and so forth under the influence of this mind-altering drug. Let the consumer beware.
But I thought that was appropriate that they had this guy doing, the Ambien sleepwalking and eating in the middle of the night too.
Yeah, and sleep driving. Frankly, I don't think they're asleep. I think they are awake when they do it, but they will not remember it the next day.
Wow.
Yeah, it's freaky.
Okay, here's the next $1 million question.
Okay.
So what foods are going to be better for, to help your mood?
Okay, well, we've talked about them already. Avoid animal products. Build your diet from plant foods, and there are 4 groups: vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans. They're all high fiber, so they're going to get you that fiber boost that we've talked about. I encourage people to keep oils low. We've talked about that for everything, but that's what we were doing in Geico, is it was vegan, but also very low oil. And let me mention one other thing that you might wish to try. And this is for mood in general, but also we have used this for young women who have PMS symptoms. And it's having plant protein. Tempeh, for example, which is fermented soybeans, or tofu, or even just beans. You have this high protein plant food early in the meal and early in the day. So let's say your breakfast is a bagel or oatmeal or some other kind of starchy thing. Before you have that, have a little tempeh or a little tofu. And the way I might do it is go to the store, health food store, you get tempeh, slice it into little tiny sheets of it, marinate it in a little soy sauce for 15 seconds, throw it in a nonstick pan, grill it on both sides. You can do that with tofu as well. And just have that. It's sort of the vegan equivalent of bacon or sausage. And what you discover is that your mood will be better for the rest of the day. It doesn't affect everybody, but it does affect a number of people. And don't substitute bacon or sausage or that kind of thing, because then you're going to get back into the unhealthy gut microbiome, and not to mention cholesterol and fat. So that's helpful. Also very individual is sugar. Some people report that if they have sugar that they get crabby. Some people feel that chocolate brings them down. I do think it's individual, but these are not health foods, so you don't need them. Be careful about caffeine and alcohols, because we've described that they can goof up sleep, and sleep is, frankly, the world's greatest antidepressant. Do take your vitamin B12. That's important. Lace up your sneakers and go for a good run, and for extra credit, do it in the sun. You put that together, you got a pretty good regimen.
Well, just going back to talking about the protein in the morning, I know that if I start out my day with like doing the oatmeal and putting the berries on it, I know, like, I'm starving all day long.
Uh-huh.
But if I do have a protein first thing in the morning, my mood, like you said, it's stabilized, and I know that I can control my hunger a lot better.
Yes, and if you look at different cultures, they treat these things differently. If you're in Mexico, black beans in the Yucatan Peninsula are a breakfast food. They'll put a little pico de gallo on top or whatever, but in Fargo, where I grew up, nobody would ever imagine having beans for breakfast. You could be in London. It wouldn't be black beans, it would be baked beans. In England, same thing in Australia. In the Middle East, hummus, which is chickpeas, that's a breakfast food. So many countries have healthy protein-based plant foods as part of their breakfast routine. And in America, if it's not a bacon or egg, it's some starchy toast or something like that. So that's why we say plant protein early in the day, early in the meal.
And what about those, just one more question about the plant protein. How about those like vegan sausages, things like that?
Well, they're always better than what they replace. So if you've got pork sausage and you throw it out and have vegan sausage in its place, that's a good change. They are processed. Who knows what they've added to them? I think of them as a pretty good transition food to help a person to learn that there's healthier things than the meat product.
So,
well, thank you for getting the word out about all these important things.
Absolutely. So, and I just want to point out that you can find the other episodes we've done. This is part 6 of a 7-part series. So you can find the other episodes on my YouTube channel, Jean Schumacher, as well as the website, Simply Plant-Based. And there's a lot of other resources to help you to change your health destiny. So our next one, we're going to be doing a healthy diet. What is it? How to begin, and tips and tricks. So thank you very much, Dr. Barnard. Once again, you're amazing.
Thank you, Jean. It's been great. Thanks so much.